I'm Claire Bennett, 31 years old, standing in a wedding dress that feels heavier by the second, and my phone is lighting up with a sentence I can't make sense of. My father says he can't walk me down the aisle because Brooke has something too important to miss. The veil slips off the chair and spills onto the floor, and all I can hear is the clock counting down to 4 o'clock. My bridesmaids stop mid-touch-up mascara wands like tiny flags frozen in the air. The message doesn't change no matter how long I stare at it. I read it again anyway, hoping it will turn into something better. It doesn't. Somewhere beyond the door, a string quartet rehearses a song that suddenly feels like it was written for someone else. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and tap like and subscribe if you've ever had to steady your heart when someone you love let you down. I grew up in a small Ohio town where people left their porch lights on and knew which neighbor baked the best pies, where you learned kindness before you learned long division because everyone needed everyone from time to time. My mother was gentle but firm, the kind of woman who remembered birthdays by heart and taught me to put things back cleaner than I found them. When she passed from a sudden illness, I was 13, and my father took my hand at the graveside and said he would show up for the big moments and also for the small ones that feel big when you're young, and I believed him because I wanted to. Brooke, 3 years older and loud with certainty, began filling the house with plans and lists and reminders, and even then she seemed to know what everyone should be doing. I stayed quiet, the kid who found comfort in after-school coding club and the thrum of a second-hand computer on a chipped oak desk. I worked my way through state school on scholarships and ramen, then packed up for Chicago when a startup took a chance on a first-gen kid who could untangle messy systems, and I met Noah 2 winters later when a lake-effect snowstorm stranded us in the same coffee shop with 1 power outlet and 2 laptops. His family welcomed me with a natural warmth I didn't realize I missed until I felt it, the sort of house where someone always notices when your mug is empty and fills it without asking. The Whitakers aren't rich. They're steady, the kind of steady that doesn't flash but never buckles, and their living room is full of small, proof-framed school pictures, scuffed baseboards, a crocheted blanket that's older than Noah. My life before them was practical to the core, every purchase penciled in a notebook, every decision weighed by what it would cost later. Theirs is the sort of home where costs are counted too, but in time and attention, and whether you remembered to pick up the neighbor's mail when she went for her checkup. When Noah proposed, we chose a historic garden venue with good bones and clean lines. Nothing Versailles, just honest and lovely, the kind of place where you could hear vows over birdsong. We planned early, so my father would have no trouble marking the date, and when he first heard it, he smiled the way he used to and said he couldn't wait to carry me down the aisle, and I wrote that promise in ink. If you've ever tried to hold a promise that keeps slipping through your fingers, you know the breath you lose while you try to tighten your grip. Over the last few months, the signs were there, small at first, then louder. Brooke's celebration dinner landing on our date by accident. A few hints about traffic, a few more about timing, then a tone in my father's voice I recognized from other years. I remember the scholarship ceremony he missed after telling me he wouldn't how I said it was fine, and he said he was sure I understood, and I did, at least out loud. I remember holidays built around someone else's convenience, and the way I learned to keep my face smooth because I didn't want to be called dramatic for wanting the same care given to others. Today I wanted to believe the pattern would break. Today I wanted the 13-year-old under the graveside tent to be right about her father's hand around hers. The wedding planner's knock is soft but firm like a cue, and my friends shift to make space, their faces kind in the way women's faces get when they see someone near the edge, and I think about what belongs to me in this room and what never did. The dress is mine. The vows are mine. The man at the end of the aisle is mine. And so is the choice to let one message decide the meaning of the day. Still, the words on the screen don't blink or blur, and my mouth is dry in a way that makes it hard to say what I need to say. Somewhere beyond the window, someone laughs, and the sound pushes back the quiet just enough to make room for a breath. I lift the phone again, read the line about Brooke one more time, and set it face down on the vanity because the mirror is kinder when it isn't backlit by disappointment. I reached for my mother's hairpin tucked into the bouquet ribbon, a small oval of mother of pearl that she wore to church on the days when she wanted to feel pulled together, and the metal is cool against my thumb. It steadies me more than I expect. The quartet starts another piece, something warm and familiar, and one of the bridesmaids asks, "Who can step in? An uncle, maybe?" And the question lingers in the air like a path I hadn't considered because I was so busy staring at the one that closed. My phone buzzes again. Not a text this time, but an old-fashioned call, the name bright on the screen, as if it had been waiting in the wings the whole time. It's Henry Lawson, my mother's brother, the one who never promised big but always showed up small. I take a breath, press accept, and answer. "Uncle Henry." Uncle Henry's voice came through the line as steady as I remembered, warm with concern, and just a hint of anger he tried to keep tucked away. "Your dad called me," he said, pausing for a moment as if to choose his words carefully. "I don't know what to say, Claire." My throat tightened as I forced out the words I had been holding in since the message arrived. "He's not coming." For a moment, all I could hear was the low hum of the phone. Then Henry let out a breath that sounded heavy, with years of frustration. "I know. And I'm sorry, sweetheart. You don't deserve this." I closed my eyes, the tears slipping past the careful makeup streaking down onto the silk in my lap. "I don't know what to do," I whispered. He didn't hesitate. "Then let me do it. Let me walk you down the aisle." The words struck something deep inside me. My breath caught, and I couldn't find the reply fast enough. "You'd do that?" I asked, the child in me suddenly small again, needing that promise. In a heartbeat, he said, his voice breaking just slightly before regaining its steady tone. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. You just get ready. Don't you worry about a thing." When the call ended, I held the phone against my chest, staring at the circle of women around me. Their relief seemed to echo what I was beginning to feel, a flicker of hope where only disappointment had lived a moment before. The quiet in the room shifted, but before it could settle, Jessica, one of my bridesmaids, stepped closer with her phone in hand. Her hesitation told me this wasn't a casual interruption. "Claire, there's something you should see," she said, her thumb hovering over the screen. My stomach tightened. "What is it?" She handed me the phone, her eyes uneasy. The screen lit with a series of messages dated only weeks earlier. My sister's name glared at me from the top of the conversation. Brooke had written Dad, still wavering about the wedding, but don't worry, I know how to keep him to myself that day. Already working on it. Jessica had replied in disbelief. "Brooke, that's awful. It's her wedding." Brooke's answer was a careless slip. "Oops, wrong, Jessica. Delete this." The phone blurred as I read, my body lowering onto the vanity stool before my knees could give way. Jessica's voice was barely audible. "I should have shown you sooner, but I just couldn't believe she'd actually go through with it." My lips parted, but the words came out flat and hollow. "I can believe it." My memory reached back without permission, dragging forward moments I had tried to bury. 4 years earlier, when I won a National Computer Science scholarship, I had scanned the auditorium for my father's face and found only empty space. Later, I learned that Brooke had called his office that morning, convincing him that I'd asked him not to come because I was too nervous. She had been shaping the narrative for years, cutting threads between my father and me, until there was barely anything left to hold on to. I felt Tara, another bridesmaid, wrap an arm around my shoulders, grounding me in the present. "Your dad is blind and your sister is cruel," she said firmly. Before I could answer, a knock came at the door. The wedding planner peeked in with her clipboard hugged to her chest. "Mrs. Whitaker is here," she announced. I blinked. "Linda." My future mother-in-law stepped into the room with quiet grace, her pale blue dress catching the light. She took one look at me and hurried forward, her hands folding mine into hers. "Oh, Claire," she murmured, her eyes soft with concern. "Henry called me. I'm so sorry." Her voice carried the kind of kindness that could undo even the strongest defenses. She sat beside me, her hands never letting go. "I don't understand why he would do this." I managed, my throat raw. Linda's gaze turned thoughtful, distant for a moment. "When I was 28, my father refused to attend my wedding. He didn't approve of my choice. I waited until the very last moment, thinking he would change his mind, but he never came." She paused, her fingers tightening slightly on mine. And for years I kept trying to earn what he wouldn't give. I bent my life to fit his absence. Her words landed with a weight that sank straight into me. She studied my face, gentle but unwavering. This isn't only about today, Claire. It's about whether you'll keep letting them break your heart or if you'll decide to stop. Her question lingered in the silence. I thought about all the times I had rearranged my schedule-adjusted plans or swallowed disappointment just to keep my father comfortable. The balance had always tipped against me. I remembered the first dinner at Noah's parents' home. Paul had pulled out my chair before sitting down himself. Linda had remembered a dessert I'd mentioned in passing months before and served it with pride. Their home was filled with gestures that spoke louder than words, gestures that reminded me what genuine support felt like. My voice dropped to a whisper. I've been chasing his approval my whole life. Linda's expression softened, though her tone stayed steady. And what has that given you? The answer slipped out before I could stop it. Heartbreak. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, telling me there were only minutes before I was supposed to walk toward the life waiting for me. I straightened in my chair, pulling in a long, steady breath. I won't let his absence take this from me, I said quietly, more to myself than anyone else. Linda stood smoothing her dress. Henry will be here any minute. Let's fix your makeup, and then you decide how this day will be remembered. Her words held no judgment, only resolve. I nodded, letting her dab at the smudges under my eyes. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, and Noah's name appeared. The message was short. Whatever you need, I'm here, even if that means waiting. I love you. Tears returned, but this time they felt different. I don't want to wait, I said to Linda, the certainty surprising even me. This isn't about who isn't here. It's about who is. Jessica and Tara exchanged small smiles, the kind that signaled relief. The planner updated her schedule, tapping quickly on her tablet. 10 minutes later, Uncle Henry stepped into the room. His tuxedo was hastily buttoned, his cheeks a little flushed from rushing, but his eyes held nothing but love. For a moment, everything stilled. Look at you, he said softly, his voice catching just a little. Absolutely beautiful. My chest swelled with gratitude, the kind that feels too large to fit into words. Thank you for being here, I managed, my voice breaking. He opened his arms, and I stepped into the embrace I had needed all day. Nothing would have kept me away, he murmured against my hair. I love you, Claire. I held on tight, whispering back, I love you too. He stepped back with a smile, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I brought something. They belonged to my mother. She wore them on her wedding day in 1952. I've kept them safe for the right moment. He opened the box to reveal a strand of pearls, their soft glow catching the light. My breath caught. Uncle Henry, I couldn't. His reply was gentle but firm. You can, and you will. Your family. That's all there is to it. Jessica stepped forward, fastening the clasp behind my neck, her hands steady. The pearls rested against my collarbone like a promise. As I touched them, I realized the weight I carried wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was also the strength of people who had chosen me, who showed up when it counted most. A knock at the door announced Paul, my soon-to-be father-in-law. He stepped in with a boutonniere for Henry, giving him a pat on the shoulder before turning to me. Everything's ready whenever you are, he said with a smile. Noah looks like he's about to climb the walls. The laugh that slipped out was small, but it was real. Paul gave my hand a squeeze before stepping out again, leaving Henry and me alone. He guided me to sit. I need to tell you something. He began, his gaze turning distant. When I graduated college, my father refused to come. He wanted me to take over the family business, and when I chose teaching instead, he said I had betrayed him. I waited that day, searching the crowd for his face, but he never came. My heart ached for him, for the young man he had been. Did you ever forgive him? I asked quietly. Henry nodded slowly. In time. But I never forgot who showed up that day instead. My mother, wearing these pearls, told me she was twice as proud to make up for his absence. Sometimes the people who choose us are the ones who matter most. His words lingered as the wedding planner peeked in again. We need to practice the walk, she said. Henry offered his arm. Shall we? We stepped into the quiet chapel, where stained glass spilled colors across the aisle, and each practice step seemed to steady the ground beneath me. With every stride, I felt the presence of those who had come to stand beside me, and the absence of those who hadn't began to weigh a little less. Still, as we paused at the altar, my chest tightened with one last fear. I'm afraid I whispered that all I'll remember about today is who wasn't here. Henry took my hands, his eyes kind and certain. Then let's give you something beautiful to remember instead. From his pocket, he pulled a handkerchief embroidered with the initials LMP. Your mother gave me this before she passed. She told me someday you might need it. I pressed it to my cheek, the faint scent of lavender carrying me back through time. The chapel doors creaked as guests began to arrive. Henry adjusted his tie. Almost time. His eyes softened as he asked one last question. Would your mother have loved Noah? My answer came easily. She would have adored him. He nodded. Then she's here too. In these pearls and this handkerchief and in your heart. The people who love us never really leave. The music outside swelled the hum of voices filling the air. I touched the pearls once more, tucked the handkerchief close, and whispered, I'm ready. Henry smiled, extending his arm. Then let's go make some memories worth keeping. And with that, the doors behind us began to close, sealing the past in shadow and opening the path ahead, leading into the moment I never thought would come without my father. The chapel was quiet, except for the faint shuffle of guests settling into their seats, the hum of conversation rising and falling like waves against the wooden pews. Henry stood at my side, adjusting his boutonniere with fingers that trembled only slightly, his presence a calm anchor against the storm inside me. The pearls at my throat felt heavier than they should have, carrying both comfort and the sharp reminder of why he was here and not my father. I touched the folded handkerchief tucked into my bodice and drew in a breath, steady but shallow, wondering how long I could keep this mask of composure intact. Melanie. Our planner appeared at the front doors with her headset pressed close, signaling the bridesmaids into position. Jessica gave me a small nod as she stepped forward, bouquet in hand, her expression one of reassurance. Tara followed with quiet grace, her dress whispering against the aisle runner. I stood behind them, hidden by the heavy doors, my arm linked with Henry's. He leaned in slightly, his voice low enough only for me. When those doors open, none of them will matter except the man waiting for you. His words landed gently, though they did little to silence the ache building in my chest. I nodded, swallowing hard, hoping the tears wouldn't rise again. The music shifted, the opening notes of the wedding march filling the space beyond the doors. The hinges creaked as the wood swung open, and sunlight poured across the aisle so bright it forced my eyes to narrow. The guests rose together, faces turning toward me with the practiced anticipation of weddings. My steps matched Henry's, slow and measured, but each one seemed to echo louder than the last. Halfway down the aisle, my gaze found Noah. His eyes locked on mine, damp with tears, his smile soft and unwavering. Relief washed through me, strong enough to carry me the rest of the way. At the altar, Henry placed my hand into Noah's with quiet dignity, whispering words only we could hear, with all the love your mother would have given you. My throat caught on a breath, but I managed a grateful smile. The officiant welcomed everyone, her voice calm and resonant, acknowledging the joining of two families and the presence of those who had chosen to be there. A murmur of approval moved through the crowd, though I noticed a shift among a few of my father's relatives, their glances uneasy. I focused on Noah's hand in mine, warm and steady. The vows passed like a dream, words I had rehearsed countless times, but that now carried the weight of everything I had lost and gained. When the ring slid onto our fingers and the kiss sealed it, applause erupted, filling the garden beyond the chapel. I felt Henry's gaze from nearby, his pride unspoken but clear. The ceremony ended in the bright glow of summer sun, but beneath the light I carried a quiet shadow, the awareness of who had chosen not to stand there. At the reception hall, twinkle lights laced across wooden beams and floral arrangements softened the corners of the room. The DJ announced our entrance, his voice booming with celebration. Please welcome Mr. and Mrs. Noah Carter, escorted by their beloved Uncle Henry. The applause that followed was thunderous, but it landed differently than I expected. It was joyful, yes, but also tinged with a bittersweet note that made my chest tighten. Henry walked with us to the center of the room, his hand a gentle weight at my back. For a moment, the absence of my father was masked by the strength of the family surrounding me. When the time came for the traditional father-daughter dance, I felt the dread I had been holding all day return sharp and unrelenting. The DJ's announcement hung in the air, and I braced myself for whispers or awkward silence. Before it could stretch too long, Henry stepped forward and extended his hand. "Just for a minute," he said softly, his smile a mixture of pride and sadness. I placed my hand in his, and we began to sway to the slow rhythm of What a Wonderful World. His steps were sure, his arms steady, and for that brief moment, I let myself rest against the comfort he offered. The tension began to ease, replaced by the simple truth of movement and song. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice catching. His reply came without hesitation. No thanks needed among family. The song faded and Noah stepped in seamlessly, twirling me into his arms with ease. His smile steadied me further, grounding me in the life we were beginning. Over his shoulder I caught sight of movement near the entrance. The room shifted as heads began to turn. My father stood there, his suit ill-fitted, his tie slightly askew. His expression strained as he searched the room. "He came," Noah murmured, following my gaze. I shook my head lightly, surprised at the calm in my own voice. Too late. My father lingered at the edge, uncertain, as if waiting for someone to invite him in. I didn't move. For the first time in years, I felt no pull to bridge the gap he had created. Henry approached him quietly, speaking with calm authority, and I turned back to Noah, choosing the warmth of the moment instead of the cold weight of disappointment. The evening unfolded with laughter, clinking glasses, and the glow of celebration. Still a shadow lingered around the edges, the reminder of my father's absence, even when he was present. Guests seemed to notice some whispering, some avoiding his gaze entirely. My chest ached with the contrast, the fullness of what I had, and the hollow space left by what I had lost. At one point I slipped away from the dance floor, finding a quiet corner near the windows. The night air drifted through the open panes, carrying with it the scent of garden roses. I leaned against the frame, trying to steady my breath. The pearls felt heavier again, and I reached up to touch them, grounding myself in the memory of my mother, in the knowledge of what she would have wanted for me. The sound of footsteps behind me drew my attention. Linda appeared, her expression warm, but edged with concern. "Are you all right?" she asked gently, her hand brushing my arm. I nodded, though the motion felt more like a gesture than a truth. "I think I am," I said softly. She studied me for a moment, then smiled. "Sometimes the people who show up are the only ones worth remembering. Let the rest go tonight." Her words wrapped around me, steady and certain, and I let myself breathe them in. Behind us, the music swelled again, and Noah's voice called across the room. I turned, finding his hand reaching toward me, his smile enough to remind me where I belonged. The night pressed on, filled with joy, and undercurrents of sorrow, each weaving into the other, until I could no longer separate them. I danced, I laughed, I smiled for photographs, but beneath it all lay the quiet truth of what had been broken. Some wounds, I realized, don't bleed where others can see them. They sit quietly, shaping how you stand, how you breathe, how you hope. As the evening wound down and the last song played, I found Henry watching from across the room, his expression one of both pride and knowing. He lifted his glass in a small toast, not to the crowd but to me, and in that moment I understood the quiet vow beneath it. He had chosen to be here. He had chosen me, and that choice mattered more than all the absences combined. Still, as Noah and I prepared to leave the hall hand in hand, I caught a final glimpse of my father near the bar, his shoulders slumped, his face heavy with something that might have been regret. I turned away before he could notice. The night belonged to the ones who had shown up, and I wasn't ready to give it away again. The night after the wedding stretched long, even after Noah and I had said our goodbyes and slipped away from the reception hall. Back in the quiet of our hotel suite, I sat by the window with the pearls still fastened at my collarbone, my reflection faint in the glass. The city lights blinked below, but my thoughts lingered on the empty space where my father should have been the silence of what he chose to miss. Noah poured 2 glasses of water, setting one beside me, before taking the seat across the room. He didn't press me to speak, just watched with the kind of patience that had steadied me through so many storms. For the first time all day, I let the tears fall freely. No makeup artist waiting with a brush, no photographer angling for the perfect frame. Just me, the pearls and the weight of years of disappointment finally crashing through. By morning, sunlight cut through the curtains, and I realized I felt lighter, though not unscarred. Noah stirred beside me, his hand reaching instinctively for mine, and I knew what mattered most hadn't been touched by the turmoil of the day before. Still, the ache remained. When we joined his family for breakfast, Linda hugged me tightly, whispering, "You were radiant yesterday." Paul lifted his coffee mug in a small salute, his smile as steady as his son's. Their words soothed, but they also reminded me how stark the contrast had become between what I had grown up with and what I was stepping into now. My father's empty seat at the ceremony was more than a moment. It was a mirror reflecting years of similar absences, each one I had excused or softened. Later that week, as Noah and I sorted through cards and gifts in our apartment, a message lit my phone. My father's name glowed on the screen, his voice following soon after. "Claire." He began, his tone heavy. "You made this harder than it needed to be. Brooke worked so hard for her promotion. You could have rescheduled." My hand tightened around the phone, my jaw stiff. "Dad, we set that date 9 months ago," I said quietly. His reply cut like a dull blade. "Why must you make me choose?" My breath shook as I answered. "I didn't make you choose. You did that all on your own." Before he could respond, I ended the call, my chest pounding with both hurt and clarity. For years I had bent myself to fit his shifting priorities. But now, the line had been crossed so publicly, there was no going back. The following weekend, Henry visited. He arrived with a small box in his hands, the same steady look in his eyes that had carried me down the aisle. "Thought you might want these back," he said, passing me the pearls he had loaned me. I shook my head. "They should stay with you." He smiled faintly. "My mother gave them to me with the hope they'd carry forward when the time was right. I think she'd say the time has come." He pressed them gently into my hand, and I understood the gift was more than jewelry. It was trust, legacy, and belonging. And we sat together for a long time sipping tea as he told me more about his own graduation day, how he'd stood waiting for a father who never arrived, and how he eventually found peace not in excuses, but in those who had chosen him instead. The more Henry spoke, the clearer the path became. It wasn't about forgetting my father's choices or erasing the sting of Brooke's schemes. It was about refusing to let them define every chapter of my life. I thought of Linda's words in the bridal suite, how she had learned too late that chasing a parent's approval could steal years. I wasn't ready to let mine slip away. That realization didn't erase the sadness, it deepened it, but it also carved out space for something steadier to take root. Noah squeezed my hand as Henry's voice trailed off, and for the first time in days, I felt a quiet resolve begin to form. In the weeks that followed, small shifts appeared. I no longer rushed to answer my father's calls. When Brooke sent a message, I left it unopened. At work, I found myself more focused, less distracted by the tug-of-war I had grown used to carrying inside me. Noah noticed, of course, and one evening as we sat on our balcony, he said simply, "You seem lighter." I didn't answer right away, only nodded because explaining it out loud felt too fragile, like saying it might break the spell. But I knew what he meant. Choosing who I let close to me was becoming less about bloodlines and more about who had proven they would stand steady when the ground shook. One afternoon, as autumn settled in and the air cooled, I visited the cemetery where my mother was buried. The grass was crisp beneath my shoes, the trees just beginning to shed their leaves. I stood by her stone fingers, brushing over the carved letters of her name, the pearls resting against my skin once more. "I think you would have loved him," I whispered, thinking of Noah, of the family I was now part of the man who had walked me down the aisle when my father would not. The wind stirred, carrying with it the faintest scent of lavender, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was standing alone. Walking back to the car, I realized the ache in my chest was no longer only grief, it was also resolve. I couldn't change my father or undo the years of absence, but I could change what I carried forward. I could build a life that didn't measure love by how many times someone let me down, but by who showed up and stayed. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in muted gold, I understood that the story of my wedding day wasn't one of abandonment alone. It was also the day I chose to stop chasing what would never come and to start holding close the family who had already proven themselves. That choice, though still fragile, was the beginning of something new. I didn't yet know how far it would take me or what challenges it would bring, but it was enough to steady me as the days turned forward. Weeks passed after the wedding, and life began to steady itself into a rhythm. The boxes from the reception were unpacked thank you notes written in my careful hand, and the dress was tucked away, cleaned and preserved. Still, a hollow space lingered inside me, the ache of what my father had chosen not to give. That emptiness was balanced, though, by the circle of people who had proven their love without hesitation. Noah's family filled our evenings with laughter and small rituals. Linda called often to ask about dinner, Paul dropped by with a basket of garden vegetables, and Henry stopped in with books he thought I might enjoy. Their presence was quiet but constant, and in that quiet, something inside me began to heal. One afternoon I returned home from work to find Noah at the kitchen counter, arranging 2 glasses of wine beside a folder. He slid it toward me with a grin. The photographs came. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, the images spilling across the table, Henry walking me down the aisle, Noah's tearful smile, Linda brushing a smudge of makeup from my cheek. Each picture carried both beauty and sorrow, a reminder of absence shadowing even the brightest frame. I set one photo aside, the one where Noah and I stood hand in hand with Henry just behind us, his face alight with pride. That image felt like the truth of the day, the people who had chosen me. I slid it into a separate envelope, knowing it would be the one I'd keep on my desk at work. The first step toward reclaiming my life came quietly. I stopped apologizing when I declined Brooke's invitations, most of which arrived by text without warmth. Instead of rearranging my schedule to ease her convenience, I left the messages unanswered. When my father called one evening, his voice heavy with guilt, I listened without interruption. He stumbled through words about wishing things had gone differently, about Brooke needing him. When he paused, waiting for me to fill the silence as I always had, I didn't. I simply said, "I hear you," and ended the call. The weight of that decision pressed against me, but it was steady, not crushing. For once I had chosen not to chase him, and in that choice I found a measure of strength I hadn't known was waiting. Not long after, Henry invited us to dinner at his small house on the edge of town. The scent of rosemary chicken filled the kitchen, mingling with the faint sweetness of apple pie cooling on the counter. We gathered around his worn oak table, the same one where I had spent so many childhood summers listening to his stories. Between bites, he reached across and squeezed my hand. "Your mother would be proud," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on mine. "Not because of the dress or the flowers, but because you stood tall when it mattered." The room grew still, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound, and I felt something shift inside me again. The words weren't dramatic, but they carried the weight of truth. That night, as Noah and I walked to the car beneath a canopy of stars, I knew that Henry's pride mattered more than my father's excuses ever had. The next small act of resistance came at work. A colleague mentioned a conference in Boston, one that Brooke had once criticized as too technical for me to handle. Normally her voice would have lingered in my head, a constant reminder of not being enough. This time I signed up without hesitation. I spent 3 days in lecture halls speaking with engineers from across the country, presenting my work with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. At the closing dinner, one of the organizers approached me. "You should think about leading a workshop next year," she said. I smiled, tucking the moment away, as proof that I could stand on my own, no permission needed. On the flight home, I rested my head against Noah's shoulder, the sense of belonging no longer tied to my father's approval, but to my own worth. Back in Chicago, life continued to offer its contrasts. Brooke posted photos from events my father attended, his smile wide, his arm draped across her shoulder. For the first time, those images didn't pierce me the way they once had. Instead, they clarified the truth I had been circling for years. He had made his choice, and I was making mine. At Thanksgiving, Noah's family gathered around a long table set with more food than we could eat. Linda handed me a dish of stuffing, whispering, "You belong here." Paul raised his glass in a toast to family, and Henry sat beside me, his presence a steady reminder of the man who had chosen to show up. The warmth of that evening seeped into me, filling spaces that had long been empty. A week later, I found myself back at the cemetery, a bouquet of winter flowers in my hands. The air was crisp, the ground frosted the sky gray with the promise of snow. I knelt by my mother's stone, the pearls tucked into my coat pocket, and spoke softly. "I'm learning, Mom. I'm learning to stop chasing what hurts, and to hold on to what heals." The wind stirred, brushing across my cheek, and I let the silence carry the rest. Standing, I felt taller, as though the simple act of speaking those words had anchored them in me. When I returned home that evening, Noah was waiting with 2 mugs of tea and a blanket draped across the couch. We sat together, the city lights flickering through the window, and I leaned into him. "I think I'm finally ready," I said. He tilted his head. "For what?" I rested my hand on his. "To stop living in reaction to them. To start choosing for us." His smile was quiet, his eyes steady, and in that moment I understood that the path ahead was not about erasing pain, but about writing a different ending. The days that followed were not free from hurt. My father called again, his words circling around apologies and justifications. I listened, but I no longer rearranged my heart to soften the blows. When Brooke's name appeared on my phone, I let it fade into silence. Each small act of resistance was its own victory, not loud or grand, but steady and sure. And in those victories, I began to find the kind of peace I had been chasing all my life. The months after Thanksgiving brought both steadiness and unease. Noah and I settled into a rhythm of work evenings together and family dinners with the Whitakers and Henry. The laughter around those tables was genuine, and yet beneath it I carried the quiet knowledge that another confrontation with my father was inevitable. He had kept his distance since the wedding, offering only scattered calls that began with apologies and ended with excuses. Brooke's presence remained strong in his life, her voice shaping his choices as it always had. For a time, I let it pass, choosing not to answer, but silence has a way of building its own momentum. Eventually, it forced a reckoning. It came in the most ordinary way. One Saturday afternoon, Noah and I hosted a small gathering at our apartment. Henry arrived with a bottle of red wine, Linda brought a casserole, and Paul carried in his guitar, promising to play after dinner. Midway through the evening, as conversation filled the room, my cousin Daniel slipped through the door. I hadn't seen him in years, not since a distant family reunion. He greeted me warmly, his voice carrying a note of hesitation. "Claire." "I wouldn't have come without reason," he said quietly, once we were alone in the kitchen. He pulled his phone from his pocket, scrolling until he landed on a series of messages. "You should see this." The screen showed a group chat, Brooke's name at the top, her words sharp and unmistakable. "Dad skipped Claire's wedding for this, so you better show up." The photo beneath her message made my stomach turn. Brooke and a circle of friends grinning around a bar table, glasses raised, time-stamped at the exact hour I had walked down the aisle with Henry. Another screenshot followed, a private exchange between Brooke and a friend named Jen. "Dad will have to choose between us. I'll make sure he chooses me." My breath caught my chest tightening until I had to grip the counter for balance. Daniel's face was sober, his voice steady. "She moved that event 3 times, Claire. Each change lined up with your wedding adjustments. It wasn't an accident." When Noah found me moments later, I was still staring at the phone in disbelief. He glanced at the screen, then looked back at me, his expression heavy with both anger and concern. "You need to show him," he said quietly. "He needs to see the truth." I nodded, though part of me knew the evidence might not change what my father wanted to believe. Still, the decision was no longer mine to carry alone. That night, after the guests had gone and the dishes were cleared, I sat at the table with Noah and Henry, the phone between us. Henry's jaw tightened as he read the messages, his hand pressing briefly over mine. "It's time, Claire," he said softly. "He can't keep pretending." The following week, the confrontation arrived sooner than I expected. My father showed up at our apartment without warning. His suit wrinkled his tie loose. His expression weighed down with something that might have been regret. "Claire?" he began as I opened the door. "I need to explain." I stepped aside, letting him in, though my pulse quickened. He stood awkwardly in the living room, his eyes darting to the photographs on the shelves. Our wedding day framed Noah's arm around me, Henry at my side. For once he seemed to see what he had missed. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he said finally, his voice low. "Brooke needed me. I didn't realize." His words faltered, and I placed Daniel's phone in his hand. He scrolled in silence, the color draining from his face as the messages appeared. His shoulders slumped, his mouth tightening into a line that spoke of shame. "I didn't know," he whispered, shaking his head. "If I had seen this," my voice cut through, firm though quiet, "you would have what, Dad? Kept your promise, shown up for once." He looked at me, then truly looked, and for the first time I saw the weight of years pressed into the lines around his eyes. "I failed you," he said, his voice breaking on the words. "I can't undo it, but I want to try." The room was still, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Noah stood at my side, his hand resting gently at the small of my back. Henry leaned against the doorway, his expression unreadable. I drew in a breath, steadying myself. "It's not about words anymore, Dad," I said. "It's about what you choose to do from here." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "Then let me prove it." His voice trembled with sincerity, but I held myself firm, unwilling to be swept back into old patterns. I realized then that the invisible strings I had carried for years, strings tied to his approval to Brooke's manipulations, had finally snapped. The absence of those ties felt strange, painful, even but freeing. He sat down heavily on the couch, covering his face with his hands. For a long moment no one moved. Then Henry stepped forward, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "She deserves peace," he said quietly. "If you want to be part of her life, you'll have to earn it." My father looked up at him, then back at me, his expression weary. "I'll try," he said simply. I nodded once, the words not enough, but perhaps a beginning. As he left that evening, his figure hunched and slow. I felt no triumph, no rush of victory, only the fragile possibility of change. After the door closed, Noah wrapped me in his arms, his voice a murmur against my hair. "You did it," he said. "You stood your ground." I leaned into him, my body finally relaxing after days of tension. For the first time, the weight I carried didn't feel endless. There was pain, yes, but also the steady light of something new, clarity, and the knowledge that the life we were building would not be defined by absence. It would be shaped by choice. The weeks that followed my father's visit were quieter than I expected. He didn't call right away, and I didn't reach out either. It was as if both of us needed distance to let the words we had spoken settle. I spent more time with Noah's family, their steady presence filling the empty spaces where my father's voice used to echo. Linda invited us over on Sundays, Paul always finding a way to make us laugh before dinner began, and Henry dropped by often with a book under his arm or a story from his teaching days. The steady rhythm of their love anchored me, and slowly I began to realize that justice didn't always come in sharp blows. Sometimes it unfolded in the quiet recognition of who stood beside you when it mattered. Christmas arrived with snow blanketing the streets and lights twinkling from every porch. We celebrated with the Whitakers and Henry, their living room glowing with warmth. Paul strummed carols on his guitar, while Linda handed out mugs of hot cider, the scent of cinnamon filling the air. Henry leaned back in his chair, a small smile on his face, as he watched me unwrap a scarf he had chosen. "Your mother loved red," he said softly, and I tucked the fabric around my shoulders, feeling the truth of his words, like a thread connecting past to present. That night, as Noah and I walked home beneath the snowfall, I felt a clarity that had taken years to find. Family wasn't only about blood. It was about the ones who refused to let you face life alone. In January, my father called. His voice was subdued, stripped of the defensiveness I had come to expect. "Claire," he began, "I'd like to see you. Just coffee. Nothing more." I hesitated. The memory of his last words still sharp, but something in his tone told me this wasn't another attempt to justify. We met at a small diner on the edge of town, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that was always warm but never strong. He looked older than I remembered, his suit jacket loose on his shoulders, his eyes heavy. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, his hands wrapped around the mug, "about the choices I made, about the moments I missed." He glanced at me, then looked away. "I can't change them, but I don't want to lose what's left." I listened, not rushing to fill the silence. For years I had softened the edges for him, excused what hurt me, but this time I let the weight of his words stand on their own. Finally I said, "If you want to be in my life, it has to be different. No more excuses. No more choosing Brooke at my expense." He nodded, his gaze steady for once. "I understand." It wasn't an apology that erased the past, but it was a beginning, fragile and uncertain. As I walked back to my car, the scarf Henry had given me snug around my neck, I felt both weary and relieved. Justice wasn't about punishing him. It was about drawing the line where pain could no longer cross. Spring brought new beginnings in other ways. My team at work nominated me to lead a major project, one that had the potential to shape the company's future. As I stood in front of the boardroom presenting my ideas, I felt none of the old doubts that Brooke's voice had once planted. The pearls at my neck, worn now, on days when I needed strength, reminded me of the people who had chosen me without hesitation. Afterward, my manager pulled me aside. "You've come into your own, Claire," she said. I smiled, knowing that reclaiming my worth had been years in the making. When Easter arrived, Noah and I hosted dinner at our apartment. Linda brought her famous lemon bars, Paul carried in a basket of dyed eggs, and Henry settled into his chair with stories ready to tell. To my surprise, my father arrived carrying a store-bought pie and looking unsure at the doorway. The room quieted for a moment, then Linda stepped forward, welcoming him with the same grace she offered everyone. He took a seat near the end of the table, not trying to dominate the space, simply present. As we passed dishes and laughter filled the room, I caught him watching me with a look I hadn't seen before, not pride exactly, but recognition. It was enough. The months unfolded like a careful weave. My father showed up to small gatherings, never missing one, though he spoke little. Brooke drifted further away, her calls fewer, her presence fading into the background she had once dominated. I didn't chase her. For once, I didn't need to. Each dinner, each conversation with Noah's family, each visit with Henry became a brick in the foundation of something steady. Justice was not a single moment of triumph. It was the quiet building of a life where love was measured by presence, not excuses. By summer, I realized how far I had come. One evening, Noah and I sat on our balcony, watching the city lights flicker against the sky. He turned to me with a smile. "You're different," he said softly. "Lighter." I thought about the girl who had once stood scanning the crowd for her father's face, hoping he would show. I thought about the woman who had walked down the aisle on Henry's arm, pearls at her throat and resolve in her chest. And I understood what Noah meant. The weight I had carried for so long was no longer mine. It had shifted piece by piece until what remained was only the strength of knowing where I belonged. Justice, I realized, was not loud or dramatic. It was steady. It was the decision to stop chasing absence and to choose presence instead. A year after the wedding, the season turned again to autumn. The sunlight filtered through the bay windows of Linda and Paul's home, warming the table where we had gathered for our anniversary dinner. Noah's arm slipped comfortably around my shoulders as I adjusted the corsage of white roses on my wrist. In that small detail, I felt the quiet symmetry of time flowers, like the ones I had carried down the aisle, only now softened by the year that had passed. Henry sat in his usual chair by the fireplace, his smile lined with age but steady as ever. He held a wrapped package in his lap, waiting for the right moment. When the plates were cleared, he handed it across with careful hands. Inside lay a baby blanket, soft cream yarn woven into a delicate pattern. His voice caught as he explained Alice knitted this years ago, said it should be saved for the next generation. I pressed the fabric against my stomach, the small swell beneath my dress carrying its own quiet announcement. Linda's eyes filled with tears as she reached across the table, her hand resting over mine. In that moment, I felt the circle of family widen, stitched together by love that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice. The doorbell rang, and when Noah opened it, my father stood there holding a worn photo album. His face carried the lines of effort, his voice softer than I remembered. "Sorry I'm late," he murmured, stepping inside with uncertain steps. He joined us at the table, setting the album carefully on his lap. When he opened it, the pages revealed photographs I had never seen: my mother smiling during her pregnancy, her hand resting protectively on the curve of her belly. My father cleared his throat, his words slow. "I wasn't there when it mattered most. I can't change that. But I'd like to be here now for you, for your daughter." His voice broke at the edges, and for the first time he did not try to defend or explain. He simply asked for the chance to stay. I didn't rush to answer. Instead, I placed my hand gently over his, the blanket still in my lap. One day at a time, I said quietly. The table grew still, the weight of the moment settling into all of us. He nodded, his eyes damp, and for once I believed the effort might hold. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a door left open for the future, if he chose to keep walking through it. That evening we gathered in the living room for a family photo, the kind of picture that would one day sit in an album of its own. Noah stood at my side, Henry on the other, Linda and Paul close behind. My father shifted hesitantly into the frame, unsure, until Henry placed a hand on his shoulder and guided him in. The camera timer blinked, then clicked, capturing the image, a group stitched together by years of choice loss and second chances. I placed a hand over the gentle movement in my belly, knowing my daughter would grow up surrounded by the kind of love I had once only dreamed of. Looking back, I realized the story had never been about who failed to show up. It was about who chose to. Justice hadn't arrived in a single moment, but in the steady weaving of days where I stopped chasing what hurt and started embracing what healed. My wedding day taught me that family is not defined by titles or obligations. It is proven by presence. And sometimes, if life grants the grace, even the ones who failed, you may find their way back for another chance. So when I think of that year, I don't dwell on the empty chair at the ceremony. I remember Henry's steady arm guiding me forward, Linda's hands fixing my makeup, Noah's eyes shining at the altar. I remember the pearls resting against my skin and the handkerchief carrying my mother's initials. And I remember the choice I made to stop living in pursuit of approval and to start living in the presence of love. If you've ever had to redefine what family means, I hope this story speaks to you. Share your thoughts in the comments and let me know where you're listening from. And if this journey touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe for more stories of resilience, dignity, and the justice found in choosing love.